Welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and this is the show where you can have your property-related questions answered by our team of property experts. Joining me today are Hayley Andrews, property developer, investor and co-founder of Your Freedom Empire. Welcome, Hayley.
Thank you for having me.
Good. Your second time on the show, I think, now?
It is indeed.
Good. So no holds barred this time now. Okay, joining Hayley is John Howard, property developer, author, public speaker, mentor, and lots of other things too.
Hi, Stephen. Good to be back.
Good. Good to have you, John.
Thank you.
Everything going well with the development in Ipswich?
Yeah, all done, all completed, and we've sold 2/3, so we're doing very well.
That's it's quite an interesting time, isn't it? It's quite a buoyant market at the moment.
But for how long?
How long? Yeah. Okay, John, I'm going to go with you first this time. In the past, there's been resistance from local authorities to allow industrial properties to be converted to residential projects. I think the logic has been to assume that such a conversion of the use would diminish employment levels. Do the experts think that with the change and review of the UK's planning policy currently being implemented, such resistance will lessen? I suppose it has to some degree.
Well, it has to some degree, but I have to say, Stephen, I mean, under the new PD rights, you can convert some industrial type buildings to residential. You need to look into it thoroughly, get a planning consultant to advise you. I'm not here to do that today because it's complicated. However, I've just purchased, along with a good friend of mine, a technical college in Essex. And we're looking to convert the main building into residential and to build some new flats at the side. Now, the local authority are going to make us market that property because it was it was a proper off-market deal. We did, wasn't marketed or anything else. They came to us and said, would we buy it? We said yes. And they're going to make us market that for a minimum of 12 months before they're going to give us planning. Now, that's in a residential area. If it's a commercial area, and a lot of the warehouse and stuff that are being converted are, that's fair enough, I think, because it's all about employment. But, you know, I'm surprised initially that it didn't come under PD. And when we looked into it with our planning consultant before we bought it, obviously, we check, it doesn't come under PD. So you've got to be really careful with this PD. It's not quite as straightforward.
Was it simply the location that took it out of? Was it simply the location that took it out of PD?
No, it's the fact that it was a school, a technical college, and we have to prove that no one else wants it for that use or for any other commercial use. And I think the government need to step on this hard, because actually it's all it's doing is slowing down the development. We'll get planning because no one will want it. The reason we bought it is because no one else wants it for the existing use, no doubt. So, and all it's doing is slowing that process down. But on the more sort of industrial side of things, just because you could get planning doesn't mean you always should. And the reason for that is if it's industrial area and you're going to develop one building and the rest is all going to be industrial still, who's going to buy it off you? And will building societies and lending institutions lend the end user you want, the buyer in other words, at the end if you're converting to flats or houses, are they actually going to let people borrow money against it? Probably not. So just because you can get planning doesn't always mean, or it's got planning, doesn't always mean you should develop it.
Hayley, have you got anything to add to that?
I 100% agree with John. You see it quite a lot, and a lot of people will just think because you are able to develop that you should. And the question mark is, who is the end user? How is that going to affect lending, and how is that going to affect your exits as well? So just because you can doesn't really mean that you should.
Now, Hayley's put it much better than I did.
Well, there you go, John. We've been wasting our time all this.
We are.
Well, look, the only thing I just worry about all these new changes, we're being told that, you know, we've done programmes on it here at Property TV about how the high street's changing and what the new role may be. And I can sympathise, if you like, with perhaps homes for elderly people being in the high street can be beneficial, no travelling, shops closed and all the rest of it.
That's one of the initiatives that I'm doing with a certain MP at the moment.
No, but the only thing is about that, you know what's going to happen. In the same way that many years ago, high streets were built because they were local amenities for the surrounding population, we're going to suddenly wake up and find there are no amenities for the surrounding population.
Stephen,
where can we build a new high street?
See, I don't think you're right, because I think there's always going to be shops in the high street.
People there has to be a balance.
But there's just too many of them. And actually, if the local authority anticipated this 10, 20 years ago instead of burying their head in the sand, mainly because they want commercial rates, which are much more, you get a lot more money than they would do for a residential property, we wouldn't probably be in this position. It's the fact they buried their head in the sand, and the amount of times I've tried to get planning on to convert commercial to residential 20, 30, 40 years ago even, and they wouldn't let you. And because of that, we're in this situation now.
But don't you think retailing is going to change significantly?
So looking at the percentage of the number of shops versus residential units will be very much a planning process. And I think it will be great for the high streets, and I think it's going to be great for us as developers, and ultimately help solve the housing crisis, which is what we want to happen.
The biggest problem I would say, the only thing I would say, is that there's been a lot of poor conversions in city centres, which have been let because they probably couldn't be sold anyway, and I think that's a shame, because we're missing a trick. We need to put some quality back into town centres, because they're the people that spend the money and so on. I've recently done a deal in Ipswich, funnily enough, and it's going to an assisted living company. We used to call them sheltered housing, not anymore. For over 55s, you and I sadly qualified to live there, and that's right in the town centre, and that's great for Ipswich, because actually they're going to be, they're owner occupiers, quality people who are going to spend money in the town.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I just find it rather perverse. I mean, I've interviewed and we've looked here with town planners on Property TV. And the amount of work that goes into the refurbishment of a town centre, it's phenomenal. I mean, I'm just thinking, we did a programme on diabetes, for instance. Well, what the hell's that got to do with property? But of course, what the town planners were saying, well, we're not going to allow shops that will encourage the growth of diabetes in a particular area. So no more than 2 fast takeaways, no sweet shops near the schools, that sort of thing. And I think that's absolutely marvellous.
It's very clever.
And I worry that this sort of change to residential might sort of kill a lot of that off. Well, but hold on. Secondly, the real issue is that to make high streets work, you need quality shops, and a lot of the bigger shops are now going away, and you wonder whether the rents and the business rates are sustainable for the small one-off businesses. And I just think that's going to be a danger. I mean, the perverse thing is, though, you've now got Amazon, who most would say have caused all of this, experimenting with staff-free shops, everything on a camera.
I find that very odd. What I would say, and one shout out for the government here, not that I'm biased, of course, as you know.
Absolutely.
But the Town Centre Fund, 77 towns in the UK have got 25 million. These are smaller towns, and not the big cities. Most of them, of course, have got a Conservative MP, but we won't go into that bit. But what's really good is that money's going to be spent in that town centre, in that local community, and that is essential to drive these town centres upwards.
How much does that come to per town,
upwards.
John?
In what way? How do you mean? Well, it's per town, 25 million per town.
Per town?
Per town, yeah, okay. Per town. Don't be so cynical, Steve.
Well, I'm afraid I am cynical when it comes to sort of government policies on housing.
Well, it's a fantastic thing that they're doing at the moment. And not only that, there's a Levelling Up Fund, which is another fund you can get, which is mainly for the northern towns, I think, is going to be. But I mean, again, that's going to be a load more money. They are throwing money at these things. There are grants available and all sorts of things. If you're doing anything in the town centre, go and look and see what grants are available.
All right, good. Well, do you know what, Hayley? I'm just going to switch the questions round a little bit here and ask you your second question first, because I think we're going to stay on this sort of subject, and I think it would flow rather better. I know that for many years it's been difficult to persuade planners to allow the conversion of pubs to residential accommodation, even though many would make ideal conversions. I'm told this is because a pub is considered to be an integral part of the community life around it, especially out of town. With a massive number of pubs closing due to COVID restrictions on hospitality, will the planners relax these restrictions? What do you think? I mean,
so
you're going to have to guess, aren't you?
Yeah, it's anyone's guess, isn't it? How long is a piece of string? So it would be very much on a case-by-case basis. You're right, the pub is classed as an asset to the community. So it has to be treated accordingly. I would say that In cases where pubs have been closed for at least 2 years or more, the pub is derelict or in disrepair, is causing antisocial behaviour, etc., causing an issue to the local community rather than adding to that local community, then the planners and local council will be more favourable in a change of use to develop that property or that plot. If it's a vibrant pub, then you've got no chance at all, basically. Yeah. No and I believe there's a 6 months notice that goes out to the public, and they would give their view on that. And so the chances of that happening is pretty slim. A few things to just consider if you are looking at pubs, because they do make great conversions and development projects, because they quite often come with a lot of land. So I would say that a few things to check is make sure that there is no LPP in place, which is a local pub protection policy, because that would obviously restrict you developing that land. Secondly, always make sure that you put a pre-planning application in. You can get a planning consultant to do that for you and get a view of what the local council are happy to happen. Working with the planning department is much better than working against them, and getting that relationship is much more valuable to you as a developer. I do
think so many people view the planners as almost the enemy, don't they?
They do, don't they? I see that a lot. A lot of people avoid them rather than try and work with them.
It's very interesting. There's an article the other day in the local council association that said that 90% of all planning applications are given. Now, I find that hard to believe. However, a couple of things I would say, I think Hayley's absolutely right. Everything she said there. I've done a few pubs. I've sold a few pubs, bought them and converted them. If they're the last pub in the village, you've virtually got no chance. They've got 6 months, like you said, to make it into a community asset. That is a nightmare, and I've been in that situation when it wasn't even the last pub in the village. However, one trick you've got to be careful of is if you're going to buy the pub and it's got a massive car park, don't think you can build an all the car park. Sounds obvious, I know, but there is a calculation that the council make between the square footage of the pub and how many car parking spaces are needed. It's quite a lot. So even if the car park's massive and you think, I can get 6 houses on there and give them 10 spaces. No, check that calculation. The planner will be very helpful. Mm-hmm. Check it, because that may mean you only get 3 houses, not 6 or whatever. So just check it. So that's something to think about.
Okay, great. Well, that's good advice from you both. Thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. Join me again after the break. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and joining me are John Howard and Hayley Andrews. Welcome back both.
Thank you.
Okay, John, your second question. It seems that the government is clamping down on the charging of ground rents by freeholders and or developers, which of course is a welcome change. However, unless the legislation is retrospective, it will surely create a 2-tier level of values reflecting the difference in occupation costs. How do the panel think it will affect the overall market?
Well, it's going to affect my income, that's for sure. So I'm not sure that's a welcome.
Well, it depends which side of the fence. I'm over the road here paying a huge service charge and ridiculous ground rent.
With all due respect, there's a reason for that. So, okay, so this is what's happening.
It's only a tent.
There's a Queen's speech shortly happening. And in that Queen's speech, we think they're going to look at changing the rules on freeholds and ground rents. And the reason I think that is if you wish to purchase a property through the Help to Buy scheme now, and it's a flat, they won't allow you to do so under the Help to Buy scheme unless the lease is 999 years and the ground rent is nil. So we know what's coming. We know what's coming. And I can tell you now, going forward, that's a massive problem for investors that own freehold of these buildings, because the freehold of the building will have no value. So who is going to look after this building? Because normally if you've got ground rents, say £200 a year and all the rest of it, there's a reason for it being looked after correctly by the freeholder. Now I know that the residents can buy the freehold, they can change the management of it. I understand that, and what will happen is the residents of these blocks will own these blocks. But do they want to own the blocks? Look at the problem at the moment with cladding.
The whole world is so litigious these days. I think I shudder when I hear groups of owners saying they want to get the freehold.
Without question, and it's happened to me. I've lost blocks, and I've gone to the tribunal and lost, and they've taken them off me. Okay, they bought them off me, and by the way, when you go to tribunal, whether it's to extend the lease or anything else of your flat, there is no appeal. That's it. It's done. And this government are hell-bent on making sure that the lessees, the leaseholders, are in the stronger position they are now, to the point that if you have a short lease and you want to extend it, the extension will be for 999 years, not the original length as it would be now. And there's some very big landlords and freeholders in London that you know who are going to be very, very angry about this, because they've got a number of leases, perhaps with 20, 30, 40 years to go. They thought they were going to, make a fortune out of a longer lease. First of all, it's going to be much, much longer. And secondly, the government are saying that the calculation between a short lease and the new lease will be cut in half. So that makes a huge difference. And it's a huge difference to me as well, because I've got a number of these freeholds. And I've got residents of those already saying to me, "Oh well, John, you wanted 50,000 for the extension of the lease. I'm going to give you 25 now because there's new rules coming out." But the rules aren't out yet.
I do think that leasehold is often demonised by people quite unfairly. I mean, if you look in an area like we are here in Canary Wharf, you've got a myriad of tall buildings. You can spot the buildings that are managed well and those Absolutely. That are not. The ones that are not managed well with sufficient funds are those with washing all over the balconies, satellite dishes hung on the walls, all sorts of things. You look at some of the more private blocks that are managed with proper funding, they're immaculately clean, tidy and everything else.
Absolutely. And the issue
that's the purpose.
That's the purpose. And the issue is, if you don't have strong management, then that flat that you've invested your money in won't go up in value. It will get a stigma to the block will get a stigma, and you won't get any more than you paid for it, maybe less.
What do you think, Hayley?
I think, I very much think, again, it depends which side of the fence you're on. To the freeholder, it's not great news at all. To the leaseholder, it's excellent news, and may encourage more people to actually purchase leasehold properties as a result. And also actually improve lending capability. If you've got ground rents that
sadly,
going up.
Hayley, you're right, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of initiatives.
I'm not saying I agree with it, but I think that's what will happen.
Yeah,
I definitely don't agree with it.
There's lots of initiatives people could take. I mean, for instance, when buildings are developed, you might say, like 106 agreements, you say, well, the developer can afford that, that's easy enough. But what do you think he does? He doesn't pay it. He just divides the number of flats into whatever the 106 is going to cost and charges well, hold on. But then if you were forced at the time of building, at the time of planning and conception of the building, that a certain amount had to go into a reserve fund for future management, the technical side of the management, then it may be relatively easy to split off management into financial management and control, and then day-to-day living control. And I think that might be an avenue that we could look at. Don't know what you think to that, John, as a freeholder?
As a freeholder, I think any more pressure on developers. At the moment, there's over 1 million. Where people have got planning, 1 million units, 1 million houses or flats altogether. 1 million have got planning and haven't been built, and everyone's moaning. There's a million planning permissions out there that haven't been, started, and all this is going to do is cause even more, because sometimes if you have you've got the sill. You've got the 106 or the sill, you've got social housing. If you're not careful, that land is worth so little when you take all those costs off, that no wonder it's sat there not being developed.
I suppose the restrictions on councils borrowing money and building themselves is not helping, is it?
Well,
really?
but some of that's been lifted. And actually now these councils, the government are actually giving them targets to build houses, which is amazing. Who would have thought that under Conservative government?
Yes, who would have thought it?
Who would have thought it?
Okay. John and I have differing views on that. Anyway.
We do.
Hayley, your question. I live in an apartment block and I've just been presented, along with other owners, an increased service charge bill due to unexpected works which were carried out apparently some 3 years ago. I have 2 questions. Is there a time limit within which a freeholder has to claim repayment of these works? And as I've only owned the apartment for 2 years and the works were carried out 3 years ago, are these costs my responsibility?
Oh, tough question.
Good question.
Right.
Great.
I'm glad I'm not answering it.
So there is a time frame of which the landlord can recover all costs.
Which is?
I believe, so it depends what notice has been served, I think. I believe if it's a Section 20B, then it's 18 months. But there's also a process that has to be followed. And failure in following that process by the landlord or the management agent would result in a claim of negligence. This is very much a landlord and tenant act.
Is that accounting negligence?
Sorry?
Do you mean accounting negligence? Or management negligence?
It would be a legal case. So there is a process that has to be followed. For example, you have to put notice, the work has to go out to tender, then there's a consultation period, and then there's, of course, the leaseholder has to be notified so that they can raise any issues to the freeholder. And if that process hasn't been followed correctly, then it is negligent, and you may have a case against them. That being said, of course, the question was about them actually purchasing the property for works that was done 3 years ago.
Right, there's two parts to the question. One, was there a time limit, which you've answered very well, which I think we all understand is probably 18 months. There are certain exceptions to that, I believe.
I think it can go up to 6 years, but...
It can. I think it's also dependent on at what point the work was billed, as opposed to...
I mean, I had a friend of mine who didn't serve notices properly, and the residents refused to pay, and he can't get the money off them.
No.
Is it a tribunal that deals with that?
It would be.
That would be. It would go to the landlord. The tribunal. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then we've got the second part of the question. I bought 2 years ago, and these works were 3 years ago. Well, I'm going to guess where you're going to come from on that one.
Well, again, it's under the Landlord and Tenant Act 1985, I think it is, but I'm not a specialist in that particular area. The first thing to do is to check if notice has been served. So go back to the solicitor that handled the purchase. Yeah. If it was served, then it may be negligence on the side of the conveyancing process that you wasn't actually informed correctly. Yeah. So you may be able to go down that route. Secondly, if notice has been served, then the amount, but not served correctly. So let's say that no notice was served, and the landlord has now issued a Section 20 or a 20B,
respectively.
For works that was carried out 3 years ago, then the amount that they can recover will be limited by regulation.
But I think. Let's try and do something practical here. Obviously, somebody's got an issue here.
Yeah.
I think my temptation would be to not be proactive about it. Just say I'm not paying it, and let's see what the landlord wants to do about it, and let's see the process after we've asked the questions, or your solicitors asked the questions.
But there is another side to this, of course, and that is you don't want the building to get in disrepair because, again, as we said earlier. If you've got a flat in the building, the whole point of keeping up maintenance and everything else up is so important.
Yeah, but in this case, it'd be the freeholder's responsibility.
Well, it would be. It's all right putting on the poor old freeholder just because he's made a mistake. However, if they haven't got the money, what they're going to do? If you want to then think, well, you know what, it's not for me, I'm going to sell that flat, they've got no chance of selling it with a dispute on it. No chance at all. So actually, an amicable answer, way of forward is always the best way. It's okay saying we'll sue this, sue whoever. Always sue a solicitor because they've got insurance and they deserve it, by the way, if they've made a mistake. They take the money off you, don't they, easy enough?
This does sound like it may be.
Yeah. And use that money to pay the money to get your flat sorted out.
I think the second half of this question, it really does fall at the door of the conveyancing solicitor, doesn't it? I think you were right, Hayley, on
and
that.
you really do need to enlist the help of a specialist in landlord and tenant law.
Yeah, I agree, totally. Yeah.
Okay, well, on that happy note, I think we'll end the show. So I'm going to say a big thank you to you both.
Thank you.
Hayley Andrews, thank you very much for coming down.
You're welcome.
From Birmingham.
Pleasure.
Thank you. John Howard, thank you for coming down from Ipswich.
Always a pleasure.
Or across from Ipswich.
Across almost, yeah.
See,
It's only an hour
I've
train.
been doing
Just get that in.
I've been doing my homework.
You have. You've done some geography for a change.
So there we are. That's all we've got time for in today's show. So thank you very much for watching. My name's Stephen Galpin. See you again next time.